Hey everybody, my name is Key, and you are now tuned in to Key's Tech Corner. So TK family, we have a very exciting product that we're going to uncover today by the name of Humio. So Humio is an index-free multi-tenant log management solution that's hosted both on-premise or you can host it in a SaaS environment as well. The one unique thing about Humio that really sets it apart is that it does not use index ingestion. It uses index-free ingestion, which is something we're definitely going to cover today during our time together. It streams via query or dashboard, and you're able to see various unstructured and structured data streams as they come in as well. So one of the unique things about Humio in tandem with the index-free ingestion is that Humio is really cutting edge. And yes, that's subjective, but I'll explain why as we go through our talk today, all right? So let's jump in. And in order to jump in, I think it's extremely vital that we visualize it. And in order to visualize, let's take it to the whiteboard. All right, TK family. So from a high-level view, when we think about Humio, Humio is a log aggregator. And when you think about a log aggregator, it's just simply where you gather your data. So when we think about Humio, we can also equate that to, again, a log aggregator. And we talked about that in the beginning, right? So we have that piece. In order to gather data, you have to have a source. In an example involving Humio, our data source will be a set of servers. So we'll say that we have our servers here. And Humio can be thought of in a fashion similar to a database. Wherever you get your logs from, or whatever you get your logs from, are sent over to the platform. So for example, you have different log types that you can consume in Humio, one of those being syslogs. And also you can use things like web server logs as well. And you also have another option in which you can use application logs. So I'll just say app logs for short. When you use these three log types, there are also a few ways in which you can feed data into Humio as well, and we'll consider those as ingestion methods. So there are three primary that most users tend to focus on, one of those being custom HTTP APIs. And these are extremely vital, especially in today's tech economy. So this is being used for something like web apps. So I'll write web apps here. And the secondary option that you may have for Humio is also Elastic Bulk APIs. And this layer is actually emulated by Humio in a manner because it's actually used from a ton of log shippers that want to send data over to tools like Humio. All right, and lastly, you have your system integrations. So system integrations are super cool and actually something I'm very familiar with. So system integrations are extremely vital for different platforms, say like a Red Hat, OpenShift. One of the tools that IBM uses a lot in terms of system integrations would be something like a Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management, or our new Watson AI Ops capability as well. So unlike traditional databases, over time, data can actually fall out of the platform, and that's okay. That's strategic, because in terms of operations, you want to ensure that the database is not overfilled, because then we start to work backwards, right? So when we think about the whole data concept, there are two individual roles that you would consider to use Humio more frequently than in a traditional fashion. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after I get done with the stick man. So when we think about those two roles, there are two primary ones. One of those being your dev individuals, and then you have your operations. Try to combine it there. You didn't catch it. So also, unlike traditional databases, there are a ton of users that are in need of the information from the Humio system. There are not a ton of individuals. So in a traditional fashion, for example, if you have a database that serves online bookstore, for example, there could possibly be millions of individuals that need access to what that database holds. In contrast, when you think about Humio, With Humio acting as a database, there are only requests coming from a subset of users, which are again your DevOps and your dev individuals. I want to keep saying DevOps, your dev individuals, and also your dev team as well. So when you think about that, that gives you DevOps who need access and also operations. So in tandem with the consideration of how the data is ingested, Humio places a huge lens on the ability to compare ingest versus query. So this is where we start to transition more so towards the graph on the right side. If you look at a traditional database, ingest costs are typically a little bit higher. And there's a reason why. We'll get to that in just a second. So on the front end, ingest costs are typically higher because you have indexes and you have to do tons of work up front to make super fast queries. So when you think about Humio, as I said a little bit before in the beginning of our conversation, Humio does not use indexes. So that's one of the ways that it separates itself from a traditional log aggregation tool. Now you need this if you have a ton of users, like the bookstore example, like I mentioned earlier. So you may need those super fast queries because you have so many people trying to get data. So of course you have a higher ingest cost there. Now that's a traditional fashion. Now on the other hand, that same need is not really a part of the scenario when you think about Humio because you don't have, again, the same amount of users. So with less users, the ingest cost is diminished. However, you have a higher query cost. And that's okay. I know that's raised some eyebrows, but we'll get to it, I promise. With the lower ingest cost, the query cost is higher, but this is not a downside due to you don't have a ton of concurrent users at the same time. So that actually helps us out a little bit. When we also consider Humio, one of the things that makes it a leading edge product, in my opinion, is that Humio is quite comfortable with taking in up to 1 terabyte per day of ingest data, right? So with that, when ingesting, Humio does this by compressing the data by up to 10 to 20%. And you'll see this commonly amongst their public information. When you think about 10 to 20%, this could also equate to 5 to 10 times compression automatically. And this can be done, this can also be more than 20% depending on the type of data that you're leveraging at that time. This is a good reflection of the ingest versus the query cost comparison. The ingest cost is lower, as I mentioned earlier, for Humio, because the point of arrival of the data coming into your database is a lot smaller. So you don't have to do, as I said earlier, for a traditional case, you don't have to do a ton of work up front in order to ensure that that data is coming in successfully, because the size of the data is smaller than it is in its original state. So that brings down the ingest cost. So since indexing is not being used, this does make it expensive to query. Well, we start to go up around this Humio area here, because Humio can do a brute force search on the database using what we call a table scan. With this brute force, what I coin as a brute force search, table scanning is essentially when you take a function and feed it into a state machine. So this is where I will actually give us a little friend here. Actually, excuse my handwriting. Let's see if we can get something a little bit cleaner there. So let's build a state machine here. There we go. That's a lot better. All right, so now that we have that state machine, so again, table scanning is where you go about taking a function and feeding a state machine every line of data. So that's a part of that table scanning process. And it's extremely taxing because you go through every single table of the database in order to pull out the information that you need, and the state machine has to look for that. Now, alternative way of doing this is to feed the events or data into the state machine directly, which will vet the log lines as they come in. So when we think about that, let's see if we could visualize this a little bit. So as this data comes in as an alternative, we can bring it here to the state machine. And this allows our developers and our ops individuals to query the state machine directly, which then searches through the database. So this is the manner in which we think about this. In a traditional fashion, again, you got table scans where, okay, hey, let's search through everything. But Humio really flips this on top of its head by saying, okay, let's take this data in, let's feed it into the state machine and allow the developers and the operations individuals to query the state machine and then go through the database to pull out the information faster. Now, of course, there's still a level of granularity that we have to go into to understand more about how this state machine makes this query in such a quick fashion. That's for next week. So, cool stuff, right? There's tons more to uncover about Humio's architecture, and I want to invite you back next week to uncover how Humio enables its live query functionality and give you a demo of what we have spoken about so far. So I'll see you soon, and until then, be safe, be blessed.